We have some breaking news in the NFL today as the Los Angeles Rams have traded for two-time Defensive Player of the Year, Myles Garrett. We'll talk about right here on Endzone Insights. Welcome back into Endzone Insights. I am your host, Darius Fitzpatrick, and it's been an absolutely crazy day. Today I was sleeping in and I didn't want to get out of bed. I eventually just decided to check my phone and, see what was happening. I didn't think anything had truly happened. Maybe the AJ Brown trade had happened, but I didn't think it was going to happen that early in the morning. And as soon as I saw the breaking news of Myles Garrett getting traded, I jumped out of my bed and had to go tell everyone that I possibly could. This trade changes everything for not just the Browns, but for the not for just the Browns, the Rams, but for everyone else in the NFL. I'm going to start off with for the Rams side of things. The Rams are easily the favorites to win the Super Bowl now. They were already favorites to win the Super Bowl prior to the trade, and now their odds to win have increased dramatically. The Rams are now plus 550 favorites to win the Super Bowl, while the second most likely team, the Baltimore Ravens, are plus 1,000. When I look at this roster, I truly don't see any flaws. The Rams nearly made the Super Bowl last year, however, their secondary and their special teams were extremely flawed. Over the course of the offseason, they brought in former Colts and Eagles assistant, and I'm sorry if I'm saying this wrong, Bubba Ventrone, to become their new special teams coordinator. Then they traded a first round pick to get cornerback Trent McDuffie from the Kansas City Chiefs. McDuffie is one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL, so they turned what was last year a weakness of theirs into a strength this year. So they already looked like they had a perfect roster in hand that was set to make the Super Bowl in 2027. Then this trade happens, and it makes them one of the most dangerous teams I have ever seen. The Rams are not only adding a player in Myles Garrett, who not only broke the all-time NFL sack record last year, but he did it on a team that was not competing for anything at all and were just looking to get a higher draft pick. Myles Garrett is a Hall of Fame level player that is still in his prime, and he has drawn comparisons to players like Lawrence Taylor, who is considered one of the greatest defensive players of all time. So with the Rams already having a Super Bowl caliber roster in place, and now they add a Hall of Fame level talent at edge rusher, it's hard to not see the Rams winning the Super Bowl next year. The Rams' defensive line, now looking at it, will be terrifying for opposing teams. Not only do they have a Hall of Fame level edge rusher, and I know I'm saying that a lot right now, but that's truly one of the only ways to describe Myles Garrett. But they also have Kobe Turner and Byron Young. This defensive line was already one of the best in the NFL, and obviously losing Jared Verse in the trade isn't great, but I can't think of anyone who would say they would take Jared Verse over Myles Garrett. And that's not a knock on Jared Verse as a player. It just is going to show how great of a player Myles Garrett is. So the Rams' defense is all set with Myles Garrett and Trent McDuffie there. Then you look at the Rams' offense with an MVP at quarterback in Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, who had 1,715 receiving yards last year, a top 10 running back in Kyren Williams, arguably the best offensive line in the NFL, and one of the smartest head coaches in the NFL who has already won a Super Bowl with the team. What's the flaw on this team? This will be the most dangerous thing I think I've ever seen in my life, and I know I'm only 17 years old, so it hasn't been that long, but still, that is kind of long. If in the span of almost 2 decades, this will be one of the most dangerous teams most people have ever seen. And so the only way I can see this team losing the Super Bowl or not winning it is if their team is flooded with injuries. That is the only way I can see them not winning the Super Bowl next year. This team has been perfectly assembled, and I put it all to one clear thing, the thing that the Rams do so many other teams won't do. They spend big amounts of money for good players. I'm going to use my experience as a Carolina Panthers fan right now, and I know this isn't the greatest example, However, it is one that I know well. When the Panthers were really bad a few years ago, and I meant really bad, with Matt Rule and Frank Wright when we were getting the number one overall pick and stuff, the main thing that we did was spend small amounts of money for positional needs. This led to many low record seasons where we were always holding a top 10 pick and the team never put hope into me as a young fan. Once we got Dave Canales as our head coach and GM Dan Morgan, they started spending big amounts of money for positional needs instead of holding back. This led to better records, and I'm not going to act like an 8 and 9 record is all that amazing. It's not even 500. But the point is that we were much better than anything that we had done prior. That is why the Rams has one of the best teams in the NFL. It's because they refuse to spend little amounts of money. They are always willing to spend big amounts of money to get the best players available. And now looking at their roster, I can't see a flaw with their roster. Well, I can see at least one flaw with some of the contending teams in the NFL. You look at the Seattle Seahawks. Will the amount of players who left in free agency hurt them? The Bills and Ravens. Can a first-time head coach truly help them win a Super Bowl? The Eagles. Can their offensive line be dominant after a down year? And can Sean Mannion revive a dormant offense from 2025? The Rams have none of these questions, and this trade just further solidifies that. One final piece of this before I move on to the Browns side of things, that involves Ty Simpson. Many people were upset after he was drafted. I was in the minority of that. I believe that the Rams were the perfect organization, and knowing Matthew Stafford could retire soon told me that they needed to get ahead of this. Otherwise, they would end up like the Steelers, a team that did not get ahead of it when they saw Big Ben was getting an age, and now they are in QB purgatory. This trade for Myles Garrett makes that decision make all the more sense. If Stafford were to retire next year, and they did not spend that pick on Ty Simpson, then traded for Myles Garrett, then they would have no first-round pick next year and couldn't draft a QB in the first round. They were already ahead of that and drafted Ty Simpson to develop him this year. And use next year's first-round pick on a player like Myles Garrett. I know it didn't look pretty at first on draft night, but Les Snead, the GM of the Rams, you can tell he always has a plan. Well, it's time to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll discuss how this trade impacts the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns have recently traded their star pass rusher Myles Garrett, and I'm sure there are a lot of Browns fans feeling it right now. However, the writing was on the wall for him in Cleveland. You could tell that he did not want to be there anymore, and it was eventually going to end up in the two sides splitting. It was kind of inevitable. The thing was, we did not know it was going to be this soon. There had been small rumors at a potential trade during the offseason. However, there were so few rumors that it was hard to believe that anything was actually going to happen with Myles Garrett. Uh, however, now that it has actually happened, I do believe that the Browns have got a good amount of compensation for this trade, and GM Andrew Berry has a plan in place for this team. The Browns did only get one first-round pick for this deal. However, they also received star edge rusher Jared Verse, which essentially makes up for a second first-round pick. When looking at the Browns' defensive line, yes, it will hurt the fact that they will no longer have Myles Garrett. I can't think of a team that you could give up Myles Garrett and not have that hurt. However, Jared Verse helps out the wound from that trade. Jared Verse is one of the rising stars in the NFL. He was Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2025 and has made two Pro Bowls since joining the NFL. Jared Verse, along with Mason Graham and Carson Schlesinger, sorry if I said that wrong, keeps this defense one of the most formidable in the NFL. It also makes the defense younger, which is something that I can say the Browns are trying to do to build for the future. The assumption around the league and many fan bases is that the Browns roster is just not there yet. The Browns need more quality players and that they need to get younger, and they are on the right path to do that. They had an incredible draft last year when they acquired tight end Harold Fannin, linebacker Carson Schlesinger, and running back Quinshon Judkins, and defensive tackle Mason Graham. You could see the immediate impact that all of these players had on the football field for the Cleveland Browns. And while they all still have some work to do to get better, they'll have a bright future for the Cleveland Browns. Then you look at the Browns' 2026 draft, where they acquired offensive tackle Spencer Fano, both wide receivers Casey Concepcion and Denzel Boston, and then safety Emmanuel McNeil Warren. Two of those players were that they're able to acquire in later rounds that initially looked to be potential first-round picks, which was great drafting by Andrew Berry's part. If the players from last year's draft do not regress, and if the players they selected in this year's draft can pick up the NFL quickly, then I could very easily see this roster doing better than what a lot of people are predicting the Browns to do. They have the talent on this roster to be good, but it just depends on two things. If new head coach Todd Monken can develop this young group of players, and will the QB position hold back this team? We all know that the Browns have a QB battle going on this summer, and I've stated before I believe that Shedeur Sanders should be the starter for the season. However, I am not sold at Shedeur Sanders as the franchise QB either. He did show promise within his rookie season, but it was not a whole lot, and I felt his performance as a rookie was probably the worst when you look at Cam Ward, Tyler Shough, and Jackson Dart. Then you look at Deshaun Watson, who hasn't looked like a viable starter since 2020 and has had multiple season-ending injuries. So clearly, quarterback is a major concern for the Browns. So that is where the extra draft capital from the Myles Garrett trade comes in. If either one of the Browns quarterbacks overperforms in 2026, then they can keep the quarterback for the upcoming season. If not, then they can use their own first-round pick and the one they acquired from the Rams to trade up for a top QB prospect in next year's upcoming draft. I believe that this is a good plan for the Browns at quarterback position. However, I do have one major concern that I don't see many other people talking about. What will the QB class look like for the next year? Everyone is predicting the 2027 QB class to be loaded with Arch Manning, CJ Carr, Dante Moore, Jayden Maiava, and many potential others. However, that is the same thing we said about the 2026 QB class a year ago. We said Cade Klubnik, Garrett Nussmeier, and Drew Aller were all going to be first-round picks. A year later, and not only were none of them picked in the first round, but we only had one QB everyone was certain would go in the first round. That was Fernando Mendoza. And I'm not including Ty Simpson because there are some people who didn't believe he should go in the first round, and many people thought maybe people thought he wasn't going to go in the first round. And if you look at the Browns, when they traded down from the number 2 overall pick in the 2025 draft, when they could have selected Travis Hunter, you could tell that they were hoping to get a QB in this year's class. But because Mendoza was the only one 100% worth a first-round pick, and I don't think any offer from the Raiders would have been enough to give up Mendoza, they could not get the QB they were hoping to trade up for. The same situation could happen a year from now, and I am certain that they will be in a terrible cycle. And I am concerned, not certain. I'm concerned that they will be in a terrible cycle of constantly trading back, hoping that in next year's QB class will be legendary, and then it just isn't. Now, that might not happen, but that is my biggest concern with this plan of Andrew Berry's. Well, that is going to wrap up this episode of Endzone Insights. I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you did, please send it to someone you know. It would really help out the channel. And next time on Endzone Insights, we will be discussing the A.J. Brown trade between the Philadelphia Eagles and the New England Patriots. Until then, be safe and live your life.